it's Alan. I'm coming to you with a video that will be serving as part of one of two videos that will be released this afternoon surrounding very different topics, but centered around the topic of what's really going on with the situation that we're going through with this transition, and a common sense methodology on one hand, and then a much more spiritual perspective on the second video. So essentially what I wanted to do with this video was kind of ground the energy of what we're seeing as far as personality types on the world stage, and kind of understanding some of the background of what you can kind of ascertain from just the behavior that is being exhibited by some of the leaders and people who are assuming power at this time that weren't even necessarily voted upon. And essentially what I wanted to do is just kind of use a common sense approach to it, having no psychological degree, but more of an observational skill set of being able to be someone who can voice what it is to study human nature and speak to it in a way that maybe brings a little bit more light to the people who are in search of trying to understand what is going on with these personality types. So what I wanted to do is kind of ground the energy in a 3D setting and reflecting back upon a lot of the work that we've been doing in the past couple of years, talking about how Earth is a great Earth Academy, and there are different students at different stages of development, and how some of them can get stunted in particular sections of their growth if there are wounds or trauma that have not been healed. And so, and specifically, when you look at the world stage right now and some of the bigger prominent political leaders, you have two glaring examples of stunted growth in adolescence now acting out in an adult format and kind of raging against the system in a way that makes them feel finally empowered for probably the first time in their life. And what I really wanted to do was look at it from the perspective of a stunted child and kind of remind everyone that where there's this much attention grabbing and needing of validation from externalized sources in order to feel empowered or to feel somehow of importance to the world, it comes from a neglectful past. And though I'm not overly excusing the behavior, I do understand it from a fundamental standpoint, which is, let's say that someone has grown up in an environment where everything was either very materially driven or very dark oriented, meaning that everything was about capitalism and everything was about power and the pursuit of presumed power, which has to do with the 3D reality and kind of money hungry and so forth. And they maybe have come from a background in which their parents were neglectful in some way, shape, or form of love, or that wasn't their language. Their love language was money or discipline. And then have them become empowered in some way, shape, or form later in life, and how that then develops into what we're seeing in certain personality types, where they're then needy and narcissistic to most degree, where their entire world revolves around how to get as much attention to me as possible, and understanding that from a fundamental standpoint so as to really gauge who it is that we're looking at and what we are actually dealing with. So taking that into a full spectrum type of analysis, when someone grows up in an environment where they are neglected of love directly from a parental figure, whether it's paternal or maternal or both, they tend to begin exhibiting behaviors that make them introverted, and they become ostracized. And in that process, they become wounded and traumatized by their inability to cope with the real world surroundings of what they're experiencing, because they don't have the nurturing center point that most of us have as young people with our parents. And so as they begin to develop, they begin to become so wounded, believing that the world is against them because they didn't have the nurture and support that they needed when they were young, that they begin to villainize the world at large, and whether it's subconsciously or consciously, begin acting in ways that make them feel like they're getting a leg up. And typically for a lot of the individuals, they tend to try to seek wisdom and knowledge in the pursuit of freedom. In the eventuality that they do rise to prominence because of those attributes, because of those strengths, to then seek vengeance upon the world. And that type of personality is clearly displayed on the world stage right now. We don't need to name any names because there's so many of them that fall into this category. But what ends up happening is they individualize to such a degree that they believe that they are somehow better than everyone else because they didn't need to resort to lower vibrational behavior of bullying and so forth, only to then become the bullies themselves later in life when they finally find their pack mentality that they were in search of as young people, which is kind of foreign to many of us that came from a background of love and support and were able to stand for ourselves, and if a bully came toward us, we'd knock him out. It wasn't something that we ever fully experienced firsthand, It was something that we observed in people who were victimized by other people. And if any of you have ever known me long enough, you know that I was the person who was exceedingly popular, who would stand up against bullies and be like, knock it the fuck off. That's not who we are. But I was not an example at every school, and that was an individual choice because I was marginalized as a gay man, because I was also Hispanic in New Orleans. And I had all of these kind of deficits that were attributed to me. But because of the way I looked and the presentation of how I appeared to the student body, people found me interesting, and I had a bit of clout in that era, both in junior high and high school, which is not typically the norm. But I stood for myself, and I fought the fights I needed to fight, and so I didn't really come from the background that I was witnessing and as an observer, watching the students that I would then be standing in between the bully and them, right? Because that was kind of my reputation. I was one of those people who just, why are you picking on this person? What is your fucking shortcoming? Is this where So I was a person who would stand against the bully on behalf of someone else. But I didn't necessarily at that time ever take the opportunity to get to know the person I was protecting. Instead, I was just a protector. It's just part of my natural DNA. But in looking back upon that time in my life, one of the things that I fell short of is to then follow up with the person and kind of try to figure out why they don't stand up for themselves. And so I never really scratched the surface to the wounding that was beneath why some people have an aversion to outright confrontation, or the ability to have debate without somehow circumventing it by being shorthanded or underhanded to the other person and manipulative. Like, I didn't have that grain of truth within me, though I had my manipulative moments, but mine was more on an altruistic level, and that was neither good nor bad, but it was something that I was dealing with. So I was dealing with my own trauma. But one of the things that I should have done, one of the things that we can do for children in general, even though I'm not a child psychologist, is to take into account what it is that is stopping the person at such a young age from standing up for themselves in a way that brings them empowerment. Because, as we can see now, what's going on in the political arenas and different sectors of the population, with the meek inheriting the earth, and that no one says that that would be an enjoyable experience, and how they're now acting that out in a detriment to society, which we could have gotten to at the root level if we would have just been there for them at a younger age. And so one of the things that I noticed in looking back upon that time is there was a consistent thread of non-support underneath the students or the student body that was most affected by the bullying. And there began to be like a fire burning within them to one day get even with those bullies, whatever the cost. And so as they developed into themselves, many of them found themselves super intelligent or super gifted in other areas that were not deemed by society at the time to be valuable, and they were going to show the world one day. So the way that they began to view the world began to get slanted, and because we maybe didn't catch it at the time for XYZ reason, I mean, technically it should be done at home, but let's face it, some parents shouldn't be parents, and then if they are parents, they see children as they're an extension of themselves, and how dare they not represent the way that I want them to. And so they were very controlled or manipulated or sheltered, and so they didn't have the skill sets that are worldly that they would need now as adults, which is playing out, right? And the temper tantrums and the bad behavior of adults who are reliving their childhood fantasies and pack mentality now as adults, pretending that their shit doesn't stink because they don't see that they're acting out wounding that has not been healed or worked with. And they're not going to do that, right? They've been so victimized by the world in the way that they see it, that why would they be wrong when the world is wrong? And that's something that happens in child development. So with that particular mindset, one of the things that begins to happen is they begin to seek their own type of grouping. And they tend to form into packs, right? Like if you guys remember any of the high school shows that we've seen, from whether it's Breakfast Club or Mean Girls, there is a hierarchy to the high school experience before one goes off to college. And that's very formative to a lot of people. So they tend to like pack into nerd sectors, or they pack into dork sectors, or they pack, I mean, I never use any of that vernacular myself because I found it, why would I need to demean anyone when I'm going through my own shit? Like, that was just me. But I was just that kind of kid. I didn't really have the opportunity to be victimized or to placate other people's opinions of me when so many people didn't like me to begin with. And then there were a lot of people who loved me and I didn't understand why. Like, I was dealing with my own angst. But I did understand the value of the fact that they did group together. And even in the animal kingdom, we see, especially in times of crisis, that they pack into family forms and they stand together as one. And so understand that animalistic reptilian nature presents itself early on and especially becomes crystallized, as they say, in the high school experience when they are the most vulnerable. Because they're not only dealing with social ramifications, but they're also dealing with puberty, they're dealing with sexuality, they're dealing with insecurities, they're dealing with all of this stuff that makes the person and the personality that we now see on stage. And the desperate need for approval can become its biggest crutch. And when that begins to materialize, it begins to take its full form in college when they finally find the right appropriation of the skill sets that they have and they can hone their skill sets into a business or venture that they believe in that will bring them value and worth that they should have known was already part of their DNA. But because of their upbringing and because of who their parents were or the way that they were approached as children, they don't understand that worth doesn't come externally, it comes from within. Their entire experience up until that point has been external validation because they've never had it from the home, which is where you begin the internal process of knowing how powerful you are, who you are, and so forth. So they're still seeking approval when they enter college. And in the college years, you begin to form into fraternal or sororities type structures. You begin to become more academically prone. You begin to focus into your skill set. So you become an engineer or you become a computer scientist or whatever your vocation is. You really start to shine. And through that shine, you begin to surround yourself with other like-minded people who also may have had the same experiences you had growing up. And that's where the deviation begins. Right? A well-adjusted student who has learned to stand for themselves or been part of the hierarchy of popularity or being B squad versus A squad, B squad is still known by everybody. So their structure, their internal integration understands the power that they have within themselves at an early age. So when they go to college, it represents freedom. When the others go to college, it represents unity of approach. And it establishes an ego-driven mentality based on mind as opposed to on the whole physical show. So as those people begin to develop, they begin to see successes with like-minded people who are also equally wounded. And a mentality begins to form that I will show the world by what I create mentally that I am the predator, that I am the badass, that you are the weakest link, and I'm going to show you you're the weakest link. And so their drive is driven more by anger, angst, trauma, and drama. Whereas the rest of us are driven by a sense of, oh, I want to accomplish something. Oh, I want to do something different. I need to change things about me. We're working internally where they're still working externally. They're facing the world and they're saying to us, you're going to pay for what you did to me. And they forget that there are people like me and you who stood up for them and who fought for them the entire time that they are now trying to victimize themselves. So they have become their worst enemy and becoming the bully that they were always picked on by when they were the victim. And now they become the assailants. And in that, they begin to form a form of narcissism or neurosis where they believe that what they're doing isn't wrong because they have the higher intellect. They didn't have to resort to bullying other people or to beating people up. They rose to power and grew to have billions and billions of dollars by manipulation tactics, or not even that, by their sheer will and intellect and the way that they can break shit down. And so their skill sets went on full display, but instead of using it for positive things, they lost sight by then becoming prone to people who would then manipulate them like they did in high school, only appearing to be friendly. And that's where the deviation begins to set. Okay, so here's the thing about junior high, high school, and the college. A person who is adjusted well enough into alignment with themselves understands that people that claim to be your friends are typically not always your friends. And they experience a lot of betrayal early on in life. Gossip within the same group, people three-way dialing each other and talking shit about one person in order to get the two into a fight. We experience that very early on. So our understanding of the worldview is that even if people finally give us approval, it's fake approval. They're false friends, false idols, etc. So our understanding of the world immediately puts us on a defensive, and we begin to limit the amount of people we surround ourselves with because we know that true friends are hard to come by. Whereas the other version of the experience, which has been picked on as young people and are stunted in some way, they finally find the validation from external sources within college, and then as they become successful, by people who want to manipulate them into believing that they are friendly or helping them, but in truth seeking particular things out of them in order to betray them down the road. But again, because they're stunted in the process, they don't see it that way. And so they're the most prone and susceptible to manipulation and to coercion into incredibly bad situations because they didn't have that formative years to understand that at an early onset. Their personality is going to learn it later in life as opposed to early in life. So now you have a massive juxtaposition between two sections of the population. Ones that made it out of high school and into college pretty well defined. I mean, the most that they had is occasionally somebody would say something and gossip about them, but they weren't in that lower half of the demographic, right? Because if you were one of my friends, I would have pointed out to you that the only way to stop a bully is to stand up to the bully. But they didn't learn that. They didn't have a friend like me next to them going, do you want me to go beat the bitch down? I'll do it. What do you need me to do? But at some point, you have to let the individual grow into themselves. But you had to have at least one person in your life, your best friend, or whatever it was, someone in your group that would do that for you to show you it was possible if your parents weren't there. And so when that's missing, they're missing a massive gap of information that will become incredibly formative to who they become as adults. And especially as they make their way towards the midlife crisis. 40s and 50s, man. That's when the shit really hits the fan. Because they have been rewarded with finances and a lot of success for what they've done intellectually, which they should technically, because I mean, I've been surrounded by G2 students my whole life, and that's one of the other reasons I'm very protective of people with autism or people who are super protective, is I'm super loyal to people. And one of the things I find really annoying is when people look down upon them when they know they will create the world. I mean, it's even the fucking Bible. The meek will inherit the earth. It wasn't hard for me to figure out at a young age, but I'm a different kind of being. So what ends up happening is that as they hit that particular plateau, people who are using them for the wrong reasons begin to circle them like vultures, and they become super susceptible to misinformation or yes men. And there's nothing more dangerous to someone who's stunted in some way as a young person who's seeking public approval or approval from the world than to be surrounded by a bunch of yes men, as opposed to having that one friend like me who will call you up and be like, what the fuck was that? Did you just hail Hitler on fucking national television? What the fuck is wrong with you? You need a friend that will call you out on it and that you understand is not coming for you. But when you don't have that at an early age, you don't have that loyal friend because you introverted, you imploded, you wilted, which is a perfectly, by the way, viable response to any type of trauma. Everyone, all of us have moments where we know we need to pick our fights carefully. But when you're young and you feel isolated and you feel picked on, you maybe have one or two people that you talk to, but you don't share a lot because you already feel weak in comparison to the jocks or whoever it is around you or the strong personalities like mine. Even though you know that you can come to me at any point and say something, I'm not the norm. Now kids are forming into that more cohesively, where bullying is looked down upon, and now more students are in a reflection of what I was like. But at the time, I was the only one who would go to bat for random people. So, but that's not speaking to me. What I'm saying is that no one was there to be that person for a lot of these individuals who are now on the world stage. And so they're being used and manipulated by people who are seeking to betray them and to use them for as long as they can in order to seek power, position, or money and finances, whatever it is. And they're not understanding that they are the ultimate sacrifice. They are the scapegoat. And they're being set up to such a degree that they don't see the walls caving in around them because they're finally popular. And to them, that means the world. Some of the most brilliant minds on planet Earth all come from a background where even if they had a steady home life, where there was a nuclear family or even just a mother or a father who loved them and empowered them as much, they were still suffering through stuff. But there are still others who didn't have that family dynamic. They came from a mother-father dynamic with a brother or whatever it is. Whatever the dynamic is, because there's so many variations to that. I'm not gunning for nobody. I mean, I made an example of one person because he did the stupid fucking salute to Hitler, but I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about a group of people because they are humans and they're dealing with trauma. And though it's really hard for us to be there and understand it for them, hopefully this video, for those of you who see it, will understand the pain that is underneath the surface, that they will never acknowledge until the walls crumble around them. And then what do we do with them when that happens? You have to understand that there are some people who have never been validated for anything they did until they became adults. And that leaves such an incredible void that the moment a pebble begins to fall into that crevice, they begin to implode. And when animals or beings begin to implode, what do? They explode. And they begin to act in rash behaviors. But what they don't see and what they don't have around them is true friends who say, hey, girl, like, what is going on with you? Like, I know you have righteous indignation, and I'm all about it. Like, if you want to go down and do something, then go do it. You have to believe in what you do. You have to conviction, passion. I get that. But you do realize that you just went out and used a racist slur and then said, oh, it was a mistake. You didn't know what it meant. So you didn't even take accountability, and now the world really doesn't like you. So the small group of people that now surround you as yes men, who are using you to abuse you and betray you, are setting you up to make the ultimate fall. And they have plausible deniability where they go, well, I didn't tell him to do that. He or she did that of their own volition. Meanwhile, the entire time they've been egging them on to do it because they know that they're expendable. And to a person who has never felt validated at an early age, that will destroy their lives. And so they begin to act in ways, because now, instead of being popular, the popularity does what it does to all of us at a young age. It betrays us, right? If you've ever been popular in school or popular in life, if you ever walk into a room and everybody stops and look at you, there comes a bite with such experience. People talk more about you. You are more subject to people gossiping or to spreading lies about you. And you become victimized in a different framework that they never had experienced because they didn't have that at an early age. So when we are watching this happen, those of you who are at this level who will understand this video will understand what is happening to them. And though you can't save them from themselves, you can literally be the voice of reason that hopefully reaches their ears and goes, brother, they are trying to sacrifice you. Have you never heard of the Nikola Tesla story and what happened to him? They utilized everything they could and drained him dry and then betrayed him in the end by someone he thought was his best friend. What part of this is confusing? Now, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it, but don't do it in a public setting. When you act out or when you lash out as an adult, it has much more dire consequences than you did when you were in high school. But because you didn't have a great experience in those incredibly important formative years, and you never got the love you seeked, now you're going to face a world that hates you. And you look at the person, you're like, do you understand the severity of what that weight will be like? We just had to deal with a school that didn't like us if we were in the bad crowd at the moment. I did some shit. I took on some people that got so mad at me. I was the villain for at least a month, at least once a year. And I loved it. Then I got left alone, but I was a different beast from the get-go. I was a different type of person. I didn't have the lack of a home life that supported me. I was the king of the castle. My mom was really sweet. Obviously, she was the empress. But I was the prince. And so she was always the top ruler, but in our house, I was the only child. So I didn't have that lack of nurture. Instead, I had an overabundance of it. And so I didn't need it from the world around me. And so when I stood before a pile of fire and I was standing on the fucking flames, I'd be like, Ann, you ain't gonna, but I was confrontational. I had anger issues. When you're raped as a kid, I had other oppositions and shit going on with me that made me have to have a different personality trait. But that doesn't mean that now as an adult, I can't understand the opposite end of that spectrum, which is when you don't have the love and support of your family or whatever it is in the way that you need it at the most tender part of your life. Because if you look at some of these people, some of them have altruistic intentions, even if they're in wrong alignment. They really believe they're doing things on behalf of humanity. And for a long time, they were doing well. But suddenly, they were surrounded by people who wanted to fuck them over, to be the spy within their ship, to be the Judas to their temple. And they didn't see it because they didn't have the life experience. And there was no one around them that could reach them at the exact right moment to go, hey, how much are you willing to sacrifice for your venture? because this comes at a high cost. And no one says that. Instead, people are, because they're like-minded, seeking the same validation as they were, trying to break new ground in science or whatever it is to make their name notable, because we as humans want a legacy. We want to be remembered for something. We want to stand out from the crowd, never remembering that we are part of a collective. We are but a cell within a larger organism. And every one of us has our strengths and weaknesses. And it is our job to find how we can incorporate both into a matter of living. But for people who have never had that early childhood development stage, where they were experiencing the backlash of what it is to have power, to be popular, when people hate you for no fucking reason. I remember, I'll give you a perfect example, because I never understood why people liked me, because I was a dick. I was kind of a dick back in those days. But I would walk into a room, and people would know who the hell I am. I've never met in my life, and it would make me feel awkward. And then I would get such an edge. People would be gossiping. I could hear them as I would walk by talking shit. And it was such a weird experience to me, but it was so early on in my life that I kind of was like, I was in the stage where I could just, all right, whatever. Not skin off my fucking, I don't care. But I had that energy, but it was such a young age. As an adult, now the last thing I care about is validation from the world. Because I've had it, and I realize it's false. It's not real. It's like people who experience fame. It's not real. You are temporarily popular as long as you're experiencing that, but at some day that ends and the popularity and the fame goes away, and then your life implodes. The truly well-aligned person hopefully has had enough life experience between the early onset and college to make them understand that they will survive and thrive no matter what happens. But that's few and far between. Even the most popular people on planet Earth reach an implosion point when the fame stops. It's not hard for us to understand it. But the problem is that no one says anything to them at that point, because they have amassed so much popularity, they have amassed so much money and so many skill sets. And so you don't want to devalue where they did succeed, but at the same time you realize that they're heading for self-destruction. And if no one can reach their ears in time, there's no outcome but what happened to Tesla. And so you have to sometimes stand before the population and be the devil's advocate to some degree and go, hey, I'm not justifying their actions, but we can definitely understand where it's coming from. So why would I say such a thing if I'm not justifying another person's behavior or a bunch of people's behavior? It's because if you understand where this is coming from, then you can find ways to approach it in a better aligned methodology than to try and full confrontation to people who don't understand how confrontation works. To a super intellectual, debate is the ultimate experience in exchange. It's the only reason, it's the only way and methodology by which people should communicate. And so if you come at, excuse me, if you come at them in a confrontational way, they find you to be beneath them. And so immediately they're on the defensive as far as they're concerned. It becomes the tongue of the snake that you are receiving instead of the venom. And then when they do strike with the venom, it's from an intellectual or analytical or manipulative standpoint in which they can then attack you in a subversive way in order to destabilize you or destroy your life. Whereas if you approach a person as a human being and say, hey, what the fuck was that? If you know them, right, you're like, what the hell was that? What were you doing? What were you thinking? And they explain it to you, and then you as the friend can look at them. I mean, you have to be close to do this, by the way. Like, I can only imagine there's certain people that we're talking about, that if you approach them like, what the fuck is wrong with you? That they would immediately be like, what? And they wilt back. But if you are someone that means well by them, and they know that they can trust you, they're going to be like, well, this is what I was, and immediately they tell you. And then you as the friend in the social circle goes, well, I get that. But now you're going to have to, like, go out and explain this. You know, I keep going back to the whole fucking Hail Hitler thing. Like, I don't care what the justification was. Unless you explain it to the world, the neo-Nazi regime now uses you as a poster boy. The world sees you in that light. And though you are trolling the people who are coming at you so negatively and so harshly, you may have not had a skill set at the moment to defend yourself. And I understand that knee-jerk reaction, but you trolled the world by saluting a man who killed millions and millions of men, women, and children. And but you can't say that from an external source, because then you're looked at as the villain. And so the only thing we can do as humanity is understand the compassionate things that are happening behind the scenes, whether people want to admit it or not, and approach it from a standpoint of trying to be the friend to the person who's never had friends, real friends. When someone acts in ways where their children are property and women are just baby machines, or when you're unique to be a disruptor, as though you're fucking Edward Norton in The Glass Onion, which would explain a lot to those of you who are following it fucking along. Watch that movie, you'll get a lot of these personalities. But when you have that type of context, the one thing that people really need is real friends in their circle to call them on shit and be the no guy and be like, I'm not okay with that. I can't even hang around with you if you do that. And explain to them in a way that reaches their heart where they are not affronted or confronted with something negative. Instead, being compassionate to the person, being like, dude, girl, I get where you're coming from, but your approach stinks. And as someone who is incredibly spiritual, I can't be associated with you if you continue this behavior. Now, I'm always loyal to you, but I won't be loyal to my own detriment or my own death. Like, what was going through your mind? Because the world needs to know in order to justify that action. Otherwise, you are going to be looked at as the devil. And then what are you going to do with that? The person who has spent their entire life seeking approval from the world is now becoming the worst hated person in the world. And they're going to be so confused by that. And so how do we, as people observing this, not then have at least the understanding to say, look, this is all happening because of your own choices. And this is to multiple people. It's not just to the one who did the Hail Hitler thing. It's to all of them who are acting in these ways. I get that you want to be a disruptor because it makes you feel cool and like the bad boy for the first time in your life. But you're not doing it in a secluded section of a school. You're doing it in front of a world, and the world can strike venom harder than any one individual bully can. You are going up against God, and sometimes, and you're thumbing your nose at it because you don't have the basic skill set or the understanding at the intellectual level to go, oh my God, I'm acting out right now. Which one of me is talking? Right? Anyone who's a spiritualist will always ask you the same question. Which version of you is acting in the moment? Is it the ego who wants to stir shit up and then not deal with the consequence? Or is it the soul who's saying, hey, I'm going to stand for freedom and I'm going to stand for all freedom and not get myself associated with other people who want to take everyone else's freedoms away if they're not in alignment? So now the person has drawn themselves into a situation where there are backdoor deals possibly happening, allegedly. I don't know if it's true because I'm not aiming at anyone, including the guy, because I'm talking about a general consensus of people. But if you look at it, like they do these backdoor deals or they get themselves into these association partnerships where then there becomes the question of legalities and you don't know everything going on in a different one, but because you're associated with them, then the world sees you that way. And then you get taken down just by being adjacent. We've seen it happen. I told you guys, all of 2020 to 2025 was a setup. This was all dry run for what's now playing out. And now we have like really major issues going on. And people will keep going, well, where is this going? I can tell you exactly where it's going. If you remove the migrant workers and you get rid of the illegally documented, you open job possibilities for the people who will suddenly become unemployed from AI. They will have to take those jobs unless they can find another job. And so the people who they then replace, who push out of their jobs with more experience, then they have to take the jobs of the migrant workers. It's a trickle-down effect. So don't be surprised when some of you find yourself out of work and suddenly you're competing with a lot of other people who have more experience than you do. Either you're going to then take the migrant workers' positions to fill those positions because they still need to be doing. After all, isn't the whole platform for many of them, we're going to bring back miners, we're going to bring back mining companies and all these factories. Guess who has to do the factory worker jobs? If AI takes over, it's going to be you. It's going to be those of you who didn't get on board. Remember what I said in 2023. I said, AI is not the death of us, but the transition is brutal. And I've been telling everybody to prepare for the fact that they did not give you the education that you needed to take the positions at the higher levels. So the middle class becomes the lowest class. And the impoverished and the poor and the homeless become expendable. And now you have a group of people in different states with different personalities who want to replace migrant workers with children. Going back to what I warned you guys about the whole child slavery thing and enslaving the race. This is very easily one of the easiest, most transparent things that is happening. And people are hemming and hawing. I watched Maya Bialik's breakdown the other day. And there was this woman talking so much shit of, oh, they're so stupid, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, who's showing their intellect now? If you have to call someone stupid instead of show up with an intellectual analysis, then you are equally the same. You're mirrors of each other. Please step to the side. And I was watching Maya Bialik, who was doing the best she could do. She still had a shit-eating grin when she would, like, be kind of petty, which, I mean, all of us do. Like, when someone is smart enough to kind of only be passive-aggressive a little bit, then other passive-aggressive people might find that amusing. But as an observer looking at Maya Bialik trying something really firm to be a little, as much neutral as she can, understanding that she's going to fluctuate as a liberal, she was still, her and Jonathan were still trying to keep it on track, while the other person was like, nose up here. My nose is up here. I'm looking down upon them. But simultaneously then talking about how anger motivates people, and that's how that election was run. So everything that we're feeling and facing is as a result of anger, because anger is a drug. It's stronger than any cocaine or methamphetamine or anything. To live in anger gives you purpose in a lot of people's empty lives. So if you can motivate someone into consistent anger, then they feel that they're up against the world and they're part of a clan and blah, blah. So you calling them stupid is serving whom? And then me, as a person observing it, I'm looking at it going, great. You are the problem. And you don't see yourself as the problem. And so that's a different personality type, right? Someone who is marginalized, who's had to fight for themselves, then doesn't know when to approach things differently. They're going to spend their entire life fighting people at that vibration. As far as they're concerned, their shit don't stink. I'm better than you. Well, then why are you calling them stupid? Because all you're doing is fueling their fire. So you are your worst enemy. And so, but you can't say that to people without helping them understand where it's coming from. There are women out in the world who have been raped by their father. There's things that have happened on this planet that makes women have to approach the world in a very, very stronghold way in order to keep their family and themselves alive. And so for them, we have the most compassion. It's interesting to me to watch the world and the way that women will say certain things where they will make men, oh, all young men are going through it. Oh, all young men are in crisis right now. I'm like, bitch, aren't you the one without no rights for your own reproductive rights? What are you talking about? So there's a personality type that will externalize all of the problems to the other sex. And then vice versa. More men will do it usually, actually, to be honest with you, where they will externalize it towards women, that they're the culprit. And so they're gender identified. And that's where their evolutionary stance is, and they don't see it. And it takes a person who, it means no ill will towards anybody, sometimes to break through to people and go, you do realize that both men and women are in dire crisis right now. And both men and women are in the same boat. And young women are in many arguments even in worse states than men are, because they still have the power. So what is this lie you're telling yourself that young men have it worse than young women who now don't even have the right to their own body? Where are you? Anybody there? But you can't approach people like that. And so what I'm trying to say with this particular post is you have to understand the kernels of truth that lay at the surface of these personalities. And you have to be willing to have the compassion to take the moment to step back and go, okay, I'm not going to justify this shit. This is not my monkey, it's not my show. I did not make this mess. But I do understand it. So what can I do to reach other people to take a moment back and stop being the venom that perpetuates the anger responses from other people so that we can come to the table and start talking to each other again? Because it's going to take someone reaching these personalities individually, somehow breaking through all the facade of bullshit, where the person will go, oh my God, that person is right. It just takes one person to stop with the egoish, emotional bullshit, to state it in such a way that the most brilliant of minds will have the light bulb go, oh my God, shit. There's some validity here. I need to pause for a second. It just takes one. But how are we going to have those people if the only talking heads, there's someone here. If all the talking people are yelling and calling other people names, get rid of these people. This is not about cancel culture. I'm tired of cancel culture. But now they're both canceling each other out and they're pretending they're not doing it. Now they're going after judges And now they're going after people who are just free speech people that happen to be of color. And then they get deported. And you're like, but they're American. Oh, you're going to keep the American kid, but you're going to deport the parent? Isn't that kidnapping? Like, there's all of these things going on that to a brilliant mind, when they hear it in a way that's grounded and is a breakthrough moment, they can get it. And it changes the way that they operate. And because suddenly they go, wait a minute. Am I just doing this because I'm finally popular? I never thought about it. I've been popular for a while. I thought the money made me have power. And then suddenly you're like, no. Like, there's childhood trauma here. And it takes one person to, like, stop being an asshole about it and just be like, hey, hello. I know you're going through it. I've been through it. And I'm still going through it. But at the end of the day, you do realize that this didn't go well. This doesn't go well for people. When you implode to such a degree that you begin to look crazy, then at some point even your biggest supporters must distance themselves in order to survive. And when you're surrounded by thieves, there is no honor. They will betray you and you will be the sacrifice. In fact, they've always been gunning for many of these personalities because they hold too much power. So if you get someone under your thumb through manipulation and coercion and whatnot, blackmail, whatever it could be, I don't know. I don't know what's going on over there. I mind my own business, and I do mean mind. Mine, M-I-N-E, and mind my own business. Meaning I keep working on myself. So I'm not speaking to anything I haven't already confronted within myself. I'm speaking from a place of understanding and compassion. But I'm saying to you, if you have a lot of power and you have amassed a great deal because of your intellect, you are always going to have a moving target on you. And the people who are most prone to betray you will be Judases from your own house. And I don't mean your kids necessarily, although maybe with the way, you know. But at the end of the day, that's a real culture shock and a real, what? Whereas someone who had, what is this? Someone who had a different life experience would expect it and have much greater defenses up around themselves for when these sharks come to circle you, right? And so though you think whoever, like these are multiple personalities, but I'm not saying multiple personality disorder, but I'm saying these are multiple personalities on stage. They really believe that the people who are surrounding them as yes men have their best intention in place or their best motivation in place. But the reality is that they are self-serving. And the people that really love you will be the people who call you out on shit. And one day, we're going to have to reach these people before all hell breaks loose. Because if we don't, the game is lost anyway. They've doubled indemnity themselves, and the only way out is, through full collapse. And they find that to be the best possible solution because they're seeking vengeance to the world that they feel betrayed them. So if you're going to reach those type of personalities, what I'm saying to all of you who are listening to this, is you're going to have to reach them through where the pain is. No one likes to hurt. I don't care how strong you are. I've been through hell so many times. I have postcards and fucking posters and shit everywhere. But the one thing I don't do is live in victimization. And I don't blame the world for my mistakes and for the choices I've made. But the person that I am had to go through hell and high water. But I did it at an early age. And then the ramifications of that into adulthood until I finally kind of got to a point where I understood my shadow actually was meant to serve me. And if I would have been facing my shadow, I would have been the master of the world. But instead, what I was doing when I was younger is trying to mask and run away from it because we're not allowed to deal with our emotions. And then you act out in ways that betray you. And then you don't just destroy yourself, you destroy your livelihood, everything you've invested in up until that point, and you destroy your family. And then you literally are left with shambles in your hand of the empire you once had. All of these personalities, whether they're political people, whatever it is, they're left ultimately destroyed. And the legacy they leave their children is the bad name and the bad reputation of who the world thinks you are because of your ways of acting out in a stunted growth pattern. And so what I'm saying to the rest of us is take the opportunity to take a different path here. Stop calling each other fucking stupid. You're not stupid. You're just in opposition of each other. You may not agree with everything going on planet Earth. Wait till the second. If you guys really want to know what's going on spiritually, that will dry your blood. That where we're at as far as consequences and the era that we're in and all of this stuff. That'll dry your blood. But that's a different thing. I'm putting this in two separate parts. This is for the scientists. These are for the people who are more grounded in 3D, who maybe aren't driven by spirituality as much as I am, but who understand a basic understanding of psychology and a common sense approach to reality. This is for you. Stop calling each other names. And if you want to make a dent in the world, get rid of the fucking talking heads that continually enrage the other side as a means to control them in order to feel valued, because that's what they're doing. They're finding their self-worth because more people want to talk to them, because pain and anger are a drug. I want you to think about how many times you've had a moment in life where you were lonely or you didn't have a lot going on, and something would pop off and suddenly you were invigorated. And I want you to realize how much of that dopamine is being pumped into your screens daily by people who are making money by feeling validated by you being angry, miserable, upset, and sick and fearful all the time. And tell them you're not fucking sick of it. And then get them out of the way. It's not about canceling them. Let them exist wherever they're going. But where is the other voices that stand in the middle and go, hey, I get that we can't excuse certain behavior. Absolutely not. But don't sit there and tell me you can't see where it's coming from. And some people are like, well, I don't fucking care. Then why would any of us care about you? What you put out into the world is what you get back. And if you want to heal, and if you want to be of service, and if you really want to bring this into alignment, then you have to first be in alignment. Stop talking to what you don't know. Take a seat and let other people talk who do know. Because we're in a serious situation here. And if you trigger the wrong person who has not healed the wrong traumas, we get another fucking Hitler. And we have a lot of candidates right now. Or at least that's what they're making us think. Get rid of the yes men. And start getting some fucking people with balls to say, abso-fucking-lutely not. What is wrong with you? And have that person be someone you actually find intellectually stimulating. Because a lot of this has to do with finding your tribe. And when you find your tribe, you have the ability to be you can be like, bitch, what are you talking about? That sounds psychotic, or that sounds crazy. Or if you're really mad, like I would have been if I was that person's friend, I would be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And because it's me, he wouldn't have been like so needy. Instead, he would have been like, what? And I'd be like, that's not fucking funny. Like, understand that I have boundaries too. I can't be surrounded by someone who does that shit. Do you know how many fucking millions of people died? Do you remember what happened there? Do you want to be immortalized as someone who allegedly is associated with the neo-Nazi fucking regime? But I'm that guy who I'd be like, right here. I'm not John Cena. I'm not, you can fucking see me. What are you doing? I love you, but I can't, I will choose me. I will choose Earth. I will choose humanity before I ever choose someone who is willing to not only jeopardize my livelihood and their livelihood, but to literally be presented to the world as a fucking Hitler representative. I absolutely not. But the way that my approach is that I didn't come at it from the angle of what the fuck is wrong? I mean, if I knew him personally, yes. But I would have already had laid the foundation with the person so that wouldn't be such a big deal. And if anything, it would make him laugh, because I do that with my friends. I'm like, bitch, what are you talking about? Like, I'm that guy. And I mean bitch and asshole usually in a term of endearment. Like, for me, I find those things funny. But I'm a weird guy. But you notice that my approach when we were talking about the conversation was talking about some of the trauma as opposed to going in with calling them stupid or speaking to just the outlandish behavior. I was talking about the personality. And I was talking about developmental stages of all things. Because if you make somebody understand that they're traumatized, that is not a weakness. That is a strength. If you can overcome the trauma, you become the superhero, the real superhero. And that's what they're after. So learn an approach. Stick to that approach and stop calling each other names in order to belittle the other person, because you are the problem. And not to you, viewer. I'm talking about to anyone who's in this vibration at the personality level that we're talking about. If you see this, just look at yourself for a quick second and go, which one of me is talking here? Is my knee-jerk reaction of anger towards this guy because of ego, or is my soul angry that he's making sense to me? Because he's not telling me he's just saying, hey, check in with yourself because you are in self-destruction. And you're not only willing to destroy yourself, but apparently you're willing to destroy your reputation, your companies, which means you will destroy the world. And is that the legacy I want to leave? And then to the friends around that person, what the hell are y'all doing? What kind of friend doesn't call another friend out on something like that? What kind of friend does it say, what do you mean you're going to remove migrant workers and replace them with children? What are you talking about? Oh, you think that all gays are bad? Excuse me. You know, fucking, we have pedophiles in churches and shit. That's your problem? But nobody's calling anybody else out because you're afraid to. And if we don't start reaching people in the humanitarian, compassionate way, we're not going to reach them. Because they're going after judges, they're going after reporters, there's legacy advertising. I mean, like, there's a whole... All of the shitstorm is going on because the only way through the chaos is to harmonize the chaos. So what are the kernels of truth that lay at the surface of each of these individuals, and meet them as people, as human beings, and help them find the value in healing the trauma to become the superhero they've always wanted to be, the superhero that was never there for them, that they can morph into and become for other people in right relations. And this society will make the change. Bye.